Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a wild mystery, how finite minds actually connect with an infinite creator. It's the ultimate theological puzzle. How on earth can our restricted, limited intellects comprehend an absolutely limitless divinity? Well, the bridge is language. Believe it or not, a single divine word actually outweighs all physical matter combined. Take this Arabic anagram. Reversing the word for glorification literally translates to imprisonment. Words clearly hold immense power.
Beautiful words harmonize water molecules, and since water makes up 2/3 of our bodies, words literally reshape us physically.
Grasping these words is exactly what elevated Adam above the angels, unlocking his unique capacity for divine connection.
So, the ultimate words we can learn are the Esmaul Husna. That's the most beautiful names of God. But divine words aren't just speech. Abraham's words were actually brutal, life-altering trials that permanently marked his soul. Historically, humanity really struggled to understand the Creator, bouncing dangerously between two extreme theological views. Let's break them down. First up is Tenzi. This views God as totally detached, a distant philosophical concept with zero connection to daily life. On the flip side, Tashbih wrongly humanizes God. Giving the Creator physical limits totally diminishes his absolute infinite nature. The Esmaul Husna acts as the perfect middle path here, balancing pure transcendence with a deeply relatable, personal connection. You can think of the Esma like a conceptual ladder, an intellectual tool dropped directly from heaven to earth. So, the obvious question is, how do we, as finite humans, actually climb this divine ladder to reach higher? It's a two-way street. God provides the names to reach down, and we do righteous deeds to reach up. Since our brains simply can't process God's pure essence, we absolutely have to connect through the veil of these names. Just like the burning bush Moses saw, the names act as a safe medium, reflecting divine truth to us. Invoking these names anchors our faith. It protects us from theological extremes and literally transforms us from the inside out. This brings us to the ultimate question. When you actively remember these names, what is actually happening to you? Get ready for a profound twist. You aren't just remembering the names, you are being acknowledged by the divine. If speaking these words changes your very molecules, I gotta ask, how will you let them reshape your reality? Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really profound philosophical and theological lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu. He explores the incredibly deep, intricate nature of words, human consciousness, and what are known as the divine names. We're going to look at how a simple spoken word goes way, way beyond just being a sound vibrating in the air, how it actually has the potential to alter our physical reality. Plus, we'll see how centuries-old theology uses these very concepts of language to bridge that seemingly impossible gap between a highly limited human mind and an infinite creator. To start us off, I want to pose a question directly to you. It's actually the exact hook the source material uses to elegantly frame this whole philosophical journey. According to the foundational narratives of the major monotheistic faiths, what makes human beings superior to angels? Take a second to really think about it. Now, if you're thinking it's physical strength or maybe some kind of pure, unyielding spiritual devotion, well, the lecture argues otherwise. The answer is actually our unique capacity to conceptualize reality through names and words. It's language, not biology or blind obedience, that literally elevates us. The source explains this whole phenomenon through a concept called Ta'lim al-Isma, which essentially translates to the divine teaching of names. According to the text, the Creator taught Adam the names of all things, and it was this exact, profound capacity for language that caused the angels to bow. Without words, the lecture argues, humanity would basically just be trapped in a strictly biological, animalistic existence. Words are the absolute crucial tools that allow us to think, to build massive civilizations, to develop complex technology, and ultimately to transcend our physical limits as biological creatures. And this brilliantly illustrates the hidden power of language, specifically by looking at the linguistic structure of Arabic. The source points out a really fascinating linguistic phenomenon with anagrams, where reversing the phonetic root of a word completely reverses its actual meaning in reality. It's wild. Take the word sabaha, which means moving, releasing, or acting on behalf of the divine. Now, if you completely reverse the sounds of that exact word, you get habese, which means trapping, holding back, or imprisoning. The literal physical structure of the word perfectly mirrors the physical reality it describes. This deep connection between words and reality is also profoundly emotional. You know, the Arabic root for the word kalam, or speech, actually comes from an ancient root meaning to wound or to leave a mark. The lecture explains that words leave a permanent mark on the human heart, pretty much like a tattoo that you literally cannot erase or simply scrub away. Words are not just these fleeting sounds that vanish into the air the second you say them, they are the shaping forces of our lives. In fact, the source argues that the great trials of historical figures like Abraham weren't just physical events, they were profound words leaving permanent marks on the very fabric of human history. To really show how this works in daily human experience, the lecture shares a deeply emotional historical anecdote. Hazrat Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, came to him with hands that were blistered and bleeding from the agonizing work of grinding wheat. She asked for a physical helper, a servant from recent war captives, just to ease her brutal physical labor. But instead of a physical helper, she was given words. She was told that saying these specific words of praise and remembrance before sleep, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, and Allahu Akbar, 33 times each, would be fundamentally better for her than any servant. Now you might be wondering right now, just as the lecture anticipates, okay, but do words feed the stomach? Do words do the laundry? It's a completely natural skepticism. But the central thesis here is that words don't feed the stomach, they feed the soul. When the human soul is completely fulfilled, anchored, and fortified by the immense power of these specific words, the physical burdens of the body are completely transcended. The internal strength generated by these words actually overrides the external physical exhaustion. But the source goes a step further, pivoting from the purely spiritual directly into our physical reality. Think about your own body right now. 2/3 of the human body is made of water. Keep that specific, tangible, physical fact in your head because the lecture uses it to set up a truly striking scientific and spiritual observation about exactly how words interact with our physical matter. The lecture references a well-known experiment by a Japanese scientist involving water molecules. According to the experiment outlined in the source, when positive, beautiful words, like the name of God, are spoken to water, the molecules actually align into beautiful, perfectly harmonious crystals. Conversely, when negative, hostile words are spoken, the molecular structure physically breaks down into chaos. The source uses this to make a powerful point. Words literally restructure the physical world around us. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the lecture connects this water experiment back to human spirituality through the practice of zikr, or divine remembrance. Think about it. If words change the structure of water, and you are 2/3 water, then repeating the divine names literally and spiritually changes your physical body. The lecture asserts that this practice reorganizes your internal, physical, and emotional chaos into a harmonious cosmos. It cleanses the spirit, and crucially, it acts as a tether, connecting the limited human mind to the limitless creator. But this brings us to a massive, macro-theological dilemma, one that humanity, as a whole, has struggled with for centuries. If the Creator is truly infinite, how can our very limited, finite human minds possibly grasp him? If we make God too abstract, he becomes completely distant and totally irrelevant to our daily lives. On the flip side, if we make him too relatable, we risk reducing the divine to a mere human level. So, how does language actually solve this impossible puzzle? The lecture frames this historical struggle by looking at two major theological extremes. The first is tanzih, meaning absolute transcendence. The source argues that historically, early Judaism leaned so heavily into this absolute transcendence that the divine name became completely unspeakable, resulting in a God perceived as totally detached from daily life. As a historical reaction to that extreme detachment, the lecture claims early Christianity leans heavily into the opposite, tishbih, or anthropomorphism, making God human in the form of Jesus. Both of these historical shifts, according to the source, represent imbalances. One makes God unreachable, the other makes him too ordinary. So how is this balanced? The explainer points to the Quranic framework, which is anchored by the foundational phrase, Leise kemislihi shayu, meaning nothing is like him. This phrase establishes a perfect middle ground. The Creator is not human, nor does he possess human attributes like a physical body or human limitations. Yet he is not entirely unreachable or utterly detached from our reality either. There has to be a bridge. That bridge is called a vasil, the essential means or connection required to reach the Creator. And the lecture offers a very strict, passionate warning here against false means. It heavily criticizes relying on human intermediaries, like certain sheiks or spiritual leaders who claim they can personally carry their followers into heaven. According to the source, no human can carry your spiritual burden for you. You have to use the true designated bridge. Let's move to and see how this builds a beautiful, two-directional theological ladder. The true Vesil has two crucial parts. Step 1 comes from above. The Esma, or the divine names, descend from the Creator into human consciousness, giving us the actual words and concepts to comprehend Him. Step 2 comes from below. Sali Amel, or righteous deeds, ascend from the human being back up to God. You grab onto the descending names, and you climb upward through your righteous actions. It's a two-way street.
To explain how we interact with these descending names without being totally overwhelmed, the lecture brings in a brilliant concept from the revered scholar Al-Ghazali. He described the divine names as a perde, a veil. But actually, scratch that. This isn't a veil that simply hides what's behind it in darkness. It is a reflecting veil. The source uses the vivid analogy of the burning bush for Moses. The bush wasn't God, but it was the physical medium, the veil, that allowed a limited human to perceive the presence of the infinite divine without being destroyed by it. The names of God are basically that burning bush for our minds.
So the crucial point is this. We are fundamentally linguistic beings, defined by the words we speak, composed mostly of water, constantly reaching out to an infinite creator through the bridge of divine names. If simple human words have the power to leave permanent marks on history, and if speech can restructure the physical chaos of water molecules into beautiful harmony, how do the limitless creator's names transform the water within you? It's a profound thought to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the source material. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
I want you to think back, if you can, to the last time a single sentence completely changed the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, that's a powerful thing to reflect on.
Right. Maybe it was like a doctor giving you a diagnosis in a really quiet room. Or maybe it was a mentor leaning across a table and telling you, I believe in you right at the exact moment you were ready to just give up.
Or even just a passing comment, honestly.
Exactly. Like a passing, completely unthinking comment from a stranger that somehow just lodged itself in your brain. And then it metastasized and fundamentally shifted how you see yourself.
Because we tend to treat words like they're just tools. Little acoustic vehicles we use to ferry data from my brain to your brain.
Yeah, but what if that is an entirely backward way of looking at it? What if words aren't just tools for communication? What if they are the literal foundational architecture of reality itself?
I mean, it requires a profound shift in perspective to even entertain that question.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to go from seeing language as a convenient byproduct of human biology to seeing human existence as a byproduct of language.
And that is exactly the territory we are mapping out today. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly rich lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu.
It's a massive, massive topic.
It really is. Specifically, this is part 4 of an extensive, highly philosophical series on the Esmaul Husna, which translates from Islamic tradition as the beautiful names of God.
But what's fascinating here is that to understand these names, the lecture forces us to entirely deconstruct our understanding of what a name actually is.
Yeah, and that deconstruction is so necessary because whether you are coming at this as a theology scholar or a linguist or just someone trying to understand the crushing weight of your own inner monologue,
right,
there's a framework here about how human consciousness interfaces with the universe that is just staggering.
It really is staggering.
So let's jump straight into the anomaly of this material. The source we are looking at is part 4 of this series. The speaker is 4 solid months into teaching this class. 4 months.
Yeah, it's a huge time investment.
And he hasn't even begun to list the actual names of God yet. Like, he hasn't given a single definition of the 99 names.
He even jokes with the audience about it, right?
He does. He says, if you were wondering how these 99 names will ever be finished, I don't know either. Okay, let's unpack this. Why on earth spend an entire semester's worth of time just building an introduction?
I mean, if I sign up for a class on the names of God, I expect a syllabus with a list of names.
Exactly. I want the list.
Well, it feels really counterintuitive in our modern bullet point culture. We want the definitions, we want the flashcards, the quick takeaways.
We want the life hacks.
Right. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the underlying pedagogy here relies on a core philosophical principle, and that is, you cannot possibly comprehend the results of a thing without first understanding the causes.
Which he refers to as the illit, right?
Yes, the illit. And the underlying wisdom, or the hikmet.
Right, because if you just hand someone a list of 99 names and their literal dictionary definitions, you've just given them a trivia exercise.
Exactly. You are just memorizing vocabulary at that point. If you rush to the definitions without the framework, you guarantee a total misunderstanding of the material.
Wow.
The premise of this entire study is that the Esmaul Husna are not just honorific titles. They aren't like adjectives we use to flatter the creator.
So they aren't just compliments?
No, not at all. They are the underlying operating principles of the cosmos. To even begin to understand them, you first have to understand what a name is in the cosmic sense.
And what words are materially, right?
Exactly. And why human beings, out of all creation, are uniquely wired to process them.
Okay, so if humanity's operating system is language, it begs the question, like, how did that operating system get installed? And what does it actually do?
Which brings us to the foundation of what actually makes humans different from the rest of creation.
And the breakdown starts linguistically, doesn't it? Let's look at the phrase Esmaul Husna itself.
The etymology is really critical here. So Esma is the plural of ism, which we typically translate as names.
Okay.
But in classical Arabic, the root of this word carries the connotation of highness, greatness, elevation, and symbols.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so a name in this framework isn't just a sticky note you slap onto an object. It is a symbol that elevates a concept out of the murky chaos of reality so that the limited human mind can grasp it.
So it's an act of conceptual extraction.
Precisely. And then Husna signifies absolute, ultimate, perfect beauty.
Not just pretty names.
Right. We are not talking about pretty names. We are talking about the highest, most perfect symbolic representations of absolute reality.
And to explain why this capacity for names matters so deeply to the human condition, the lecture takes us back to the primal origin story, the story of Adam. The text states that God taught Adam the names. And because Adam possessed these names, the angels, who were beings of immense power and pure obedience, were commanded to bow down to him.
And this is where the linguistic nuance in the Arabic narrative becomes absolutely critical to understanding human superiority in this hierarchy.
Let's get into the grammar of it.
There's a specific grammatical choice in the text. When the names are presented to the angels to see if they can identify them, the Arabic pronoun used to refer to these names is hum.
Okay, stop right there because I want to make sure I'm following this. Why does the pronoun hum change the entire meaning of the story?
Well, in Arabic grammar, hum is a plural pronoun typically reserved exclusively for living, conscious, sentient entities.
By people.
Exactly. You use it for people or beings with intellect. If the text were merely referring to a list of lifeless vocabulary words, abstract nouns like tree, rock, water, it would have used a different pronoun. Usually a feminine singular pronoun used for inanimate plurals. By intentionally using hum, the text implies that Adam wasn't just handed a mental dictionary.
Wait, are you saying the angels weren't just looking at words on a chalkboard?
They weren't looking at nouns. The essence, or the owners of the names, were presented. The conscious reality behind the words was shown to the angels.
So Adam wasn't taught how to label things.
Right. He was given the capacity to comprehend the living essence of reality through symbolic representation.
Okay, I want to push back on this just a little bit, or at least try to ground it in my modern brain.
Go for it.
Is this framework essentially saying that humanity's ultimate superpower over the angels, the reason beings of pure light bowed down to a creature made of mud, is cognitive processing?
That's one way to frame it, yeah.
Like angels might have raw computational power or brute cosmic strength, but humans have the thoftware. We have the language that allows us to actually define, synthesize, and manipulate the physical and metaphysical world.
That is exactly the argument being made by the source. Without words, without this capacity for Esma, humans would be entirely trapped in pure biology.
We'd just be highly anxious primates.
Pretty much. We would be completely restricted to our immediate physical sensory inputs, hunger, temperature, fear, reproduction.
Just reacting to stimulus.
Right. If humans did not have this elevated capacity for language, we would remain animals. It is language, this conceptual operating system, that elevates us from mere biological survival into the realm of meaning, technology, culture, and civilization.
The lecture gives this incredible physical example of this that really crystallized it for me. It talks about the relationship between humans and elephants.
Oh, the elephant analogy is brilliant.
It really is. An elephant is, 50 times stronger than a human being?
Easily.
If reality were just a biological contest of brute force and mass, the elephant would crush us every single time. It wouldn't even be a contest.
But because we have words, we possess the ability to abstract reality.
Yes. From words, we generate knowledge. From knowledge, we generate strategy, technology, tools, and social cooperation. We write manuals on how to train elephants. We build chains. We construct enclosures.
Because of language, the creature made of mud rides the elephant instead of being trampled by it.
Exactly. We use words to move mountains.
And that leads to a much deeper realization about the literal weight and gravity of language. When you realize that words govern the physical world by organizing human action, you start to understand theological statements in a whole new light.
Give me an example of that.
For instance, the ultimate phrase in Islamic tradition, the Declaration of Faith, La ilaha illallah. There is no deity but God.
Okay.
It's often stated that if you were to place the single phrase on one side of a cosmic scale and the entire material universe on the other, the words would outweigh the universe.
Which on the surface just sounds like a nice piece of religious poetry, like a metaphor for how important faith is.
Right, but the lecture seems to mean this almost structurally.
Structurally, like literally.
Structurally and functionally, because the human being is a composite creature. We are biology and consciousness. Words feed the consciousness, the soul.
Okay, I'm with you.
When your soul is fed by ultimate meaning, by words of absolute truth, your physical body is sustained, directed, and ordered in a way that raw physical calories or biological drives could never, ever achieve.
Wow.
The physical universe is just matter. But words of truth provide the gravity that gives that matter purpose and direction.
Okay, so if humanity's operating system is language, and we use that language to organize and command the physical world, it begs an enormous question. What is the universe's operating system?
That is the logical next step.
Because if we are naming things to control them, what is the cosmos doing? The lecture doesn't just keep language in the realm of human psychology. It applies it directly to the physics of the universe.
And this introduces the concept of tasbih. Now, in most standard translations, tasbih is rendered simply as glorification or praising God.
Right, you picture someone sitting quietly, maybe with prayer beads, just reciting words of praise.
Exactly. But when you dig into the linguistic roots, as this framework does, a much more dynamic, almost kinetic reality emerges.
Kinetic. How so?
Well, the phrase, subhanallah, glory be to God, stems from a root that means to move freely, to swim, to orbit, to glide through space.
Wait, so it's not a static concept at all? It doesn't just mean standing still and saying nice things?
Not at all. It's fundamentally about movement. It means recognizing that the entire cosmos, from the macro level of galaxies and star systems orbiting in the vacuum of space, all the way down to the micro level of electrons orbiting a nucleus in a single atom.
Everything is moving.
Everything is moving, operating, and functioning in its designated lane. The physical laws of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, these are acts of tasbih.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The universe is a massive cosmic chorus, and every atom is singing its part simply by existing and moving according to its divine design.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I want you listening to really picture this, because this is the moment in the material that completely blew my mind.
The anagrams.
Yes, the Arabic anagrams. To prove this connection between language and physical reality, the lecture delves into the idea that the physics of the universe are baked into the spelling of the words themselves. Let's look at the root for tasbih.
Okay, so the word is sabaha, which means to move freely, to orbit, to glorify. In Arabic, the root letters are SBH.
SBH, okay.
If you take those exact letters and reverse them, you get HBS, which forms the word habis.
And habis means to imprison, to trap, to stop movement entirely.
Exactly. The exact opposite spelling yields the exact opposite physical action in reality. The forward motion of the word means freedom and orbit. The backward motion of the word means imprisonment and stagnation.
But I want to be skeptical here for a second. Right?
Yeah.
Is this just a neat parlor trick? Because I can find anagrams in English that are ironic, you know.
Sure.
Does this framework actually argue that there is a structural resonance between the letters and physical laws? Or is it just a massive coincidence? Because the lecture provides more examples that make it really, really hard to dismiss as just a fluke.
The sheer volume of these structural opposites argues against simple coincidence.
Let's hear another one.
Take the word dara. It refers to a pearl or something that is translucent, something that lets light pass through it freely. In physics terms, a conductor.
Okay, conductor.
If you reverse the root letters, you get red.
And red means to repel, to bounce back, to insulate. So conductor reversed literally becomes insulator.
Yep. Another compelling example is nahara, the root for river. It signifies something that flows freely, that lets go, that provides life through movement.
And reversed.
You reverse those letters and you get rehain, which means to hold hostage, to block, to keep as collateral.
Wow. Flow reversed becomes blockage. Radiating reversed becomes repelling. Freedom reversed becomes imprisonment. It is as if the language itself possesses an intrinsic knowledge of how the physical world operates.
The architecture of the letters mirrors the architecture of reality.
Which leads to a crucial extrapolation. If language isn't arbitrary, if there is a structural physical resonance between the words we use and the reality we inhabit, then the words we speak must have a tangible physical impact on the matter around us.
And this is where the lecture references a very famous, though scientifically controversial, observation. It mentions the Japanese scientists who experimented with water molecules.
Right, it's clearly pointing to the work of Masaru Emoto. The setup was that he exposed glasses of water to different words, intents, and music, and then froze the water to look at the crystalline structures under a microscope.
The observation was that when the water was exposed to positive, beautiful, or divine words, words of love, or the word Allah, the resulting molecular structures formed these incredibly complex, beautiful, symmetrical, snowflake-like patterns.
But when the water was exposed to negative words, insults, harsh language, or words like Satan, the resulting microscopic structures were chaotic, fragmented, asymmetrical, and physically ugly.
Now, it is really important to acknowledge that from a strict, peer-reviewed empirical science perspective, Emoto's methodology has been heavily criticized.
Yeah, for confirmation bias and lack of reproducibility. I'm glad you brought that up, because my immediate reaction when hearing that was, wait, are we relying on pseudoscience to make a theological point here?
It's a fair question, but here is why the criticism of the lab methodology almost doesn't matter in the context of this lecture. The speaker is using it as a metaphysical illustration of a profound truth about human biology.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's assume for a moment that the water experiment is purely a metaphor. What is the core truth of that metaphor? Human beings are roughly 2/3 water.
Right.
Our brains, our hearts, our cells are predominantly fluid.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If the underlying premise of the anagrams is true, that words carry physical gravity and structural resonance, then what is the internal physiological impact of the words you speak to yourself? What happens to the water inside your own cells when you are consumed by negative self-talk, anger, or despair? What happens when you recite words of peace, meditation, or prayer?
Think about that. When you are sitting in traffic, just white-knuckling the steering wheel, muttering under your breath about how much you hate your life, or when you are trapped in a cycle of anxiety, you are not just experiencing a bad mood. According to this philosophical framework, you are literally creating cellular chaos inside your own body. You are disorganizing the fluid that makes up your physical form.
You are engaging in the inverse of Tasbin. The cosmic chorus we talked about earlier isn't just an abstract idea, it is a biological imperative.
So to complain is to literally work against your own biology.
Exactly. To engage in Tasbin, to align your internal monologue and spoken words with higher, positive, divine realities, is to harmonize your own internal cellular chaos into a symphony.
It is incredibly empowering.
You are bringing the water inside your body into alignment with the cosmic order. You are choosing the forward motion of Sibaha, freedom, over the backward motion of Habis, imprisonment.
So if positive and negative words can literally restructure our internal biology, what happens when the universe speaks to us not in syllables, but in events? Because the lecture takes a really sharp, intense turn here. We move from how spoken words affect us to how the trials of our lives act as a visceral, deeply physical vocabulary.
We enter the realm of human suffering and character formation.
And to explain this, the lecture dives into the etymological roots of the Arabic word kilam. Now, in everyday translation, kilam simply means speech or words.
But the root is so much darker, so much heavier than just talking.
It is. The etymological root of kilam literally means to wound.
To wound.
Yeah, it means to pierce the skin, to leave a lasting mark, like a scar. The lecture compares it to an indelible tattoo on the heart. It isn't a superficial smudge of dirt that you can just wipe away with a sponge.
Right, it can't even be surgically excised without taking a piece of you with it. Kalam refers to communication that permanently alters the host.
And to really drive this home, the speaker makes a stark distinction between kalam, the words that wound, and another Arabic word for speech, kayal.
What's fascinating here is he draws on classical Arabic linguistics, specifically the work of Ibn Jini, who analyzed the phonetic structure of words.
Right.
When you look at the root letters of Kabo, which are QVL, the phonetic combinations yield concepts related to lightness, speed, and transience.
So cavil is the everyday chatter. It's the noise of the marketplace. It's reading the news, having a casual conversation, or just passing the time.
Yeah.
It basically goes in one ear and out the other.
Exactly. But kilam is entirely different.
How so?
Well, kilam, spelled K-L-M, shares phonetic, structural, and conceptual ties with really heavy, intense words. Words like melek, which means angel, a being of immense, terrifying power.
Yeah.
And mulk, which means absolute dominion, authority, and sovereignty. Kalam is speech with immense gravity, power, and inescapable impact.
And to bring this concept out of the dictionary and into real life, the lecture uses the prophet Ibrahim in the Islamic tradition.
A perfect example.
The Quran explicitly states that God tested Abraham with words. But as the speaker brilliantly points out, if we think of words merely as kavol, chatter, this makes no sense.
Abraham wasn't given a spelling bee.
Right. He wasn't handed a linguistic riddle or a written exam.
The words that Abraham was tested with were the most profound, agonizing, flesh and blood life events imaginable.
Let's walk through those words, because when you look at Abraham's life through this lens, it changes everything. What were the words that wounded him?
The first word was the fire of Nimrod, being thrown into a literal furnace for his beliefs.
A physical lethal test.
Yes.
Yeah.
The second word was the agonizing ideological and physical conflict with his own father, a man he loved deeply but who built idols.
And then there's the exile.
Another word was his forced exile and migration from his homeland, leaving absolutely everything he knew behind. Then there were the deeply personal trials regarding his wife Sarah, and the decades of heartbreaking, echoing childlessness.
And then the ultimate unimaginable word, the command to sacrifice his long-awaited son, Ismail.
Exactly. None of these were linguistic puzzles. They were visceral, traumatic events. But the Quran calls them words.
I want you to pause and really think about your own life right now in this context. Think about the hardest things you have ever had to survive.
The grief that hollowed you out.
Yeah, the betrayals that made you question everyone. The massive public failures, the moments you were quite literally brought to your knees crying on the floor.
We tend to view these things as random, chaotic accidents of an uncaring universe.
But what if they aren't? What if those hardships are actually a deeply personal language? What if they are kilam? Words specifically spoken into your life, meant to carve out your character, leaving a permanent mark on your soul.
It is a radical reframing of human adversity.
It really is.
If you view suffering as a meaningless accident, it just crushes you. But if you view it as kilam, as a profound, tailored communication from the ultimate reality, it gives the suffering immense purpose.
It's like it's not random.
Right. It is designed to shape you, to expand your capacity, to wound you so that light can enter.
The poet Rumi actually has a line like that, right? The wound is the place where the light enters you.
Exactly. And this connects perfectly back to the overarching theme of the lecture series, the Esmaul Husna, the beautiful names of God.
How does it connect?
Just as the agonizing physical trials of life leave a permanent, character-defining mark on the individual, the divine names are designed to leave a transformative, indelible mark on the human heart.
So they aren't just vocabulary.
The names are not meant to be lightly spoken kavol that you just memorize and recite.
Yeah.
They are meant to be deeply felt kilam. They are meant to alter your internal structure permanently.
Okay, so human life, our trials, our biology and language are all deeply physically interconnected. Our pain is a vocabulary. Our words shape ourselves. But this brings up a massive, unavoidable philosophical problem, which the lecture tackles head-on.
The theological tightrope.
Yeah, exactly. If we are so entirely bound by our physical reality, by our biology, our trauma, our human words, how on earth do we use these limited physical concepts to understand a completely limitless creator?
It's the ultimate paradox.
Right. If God is infinite and we are finite, how do we talk about God without accidentally shrinking God down to our size?
It is the central tension of all monotheistic thought. And the lecture spends a significant amount of time exploring how different historical traditions have attempted, and often failed, to walk it.
Let's get into the mechanics of that.
The tension exists between two opposing concepts, tensor and teshbih.
Let's define those very clearly because they are the guardrails for this whole discussion.
Okay, so tenza means absolute transcendence. It is the process of abstracting God. It is declaring that God is completely beyond any human comprehension, free from any physical attributes, time, space, or biological needs.
God is the ultimate other.
Precisely.
Okay, and the opposite.
The opposite is teshbih, which translates to anthropomorphism.
Okay, giving God human traits.
Right. It is the process of comparing God to humans. It is assigning human traits, physical forms, or human emotions, like anger, jealousy, or literal fatherhood, to the divine in order to make the concept relatable to our human brains.
And the speaker argues that leaning too far in either direction is a devastating trap.
Yes.
Now, I want to be very clear here for the listener. We're neutrally reporting on the specific historical and theological arguments the speaker is making in this source material. We aren't endorsing them, but we need to understand his logical progression.
Right. It's important to understand the historical critique he's building.
According to the lecturer, historical Judaism fell into the trap of extreme tenzit. Let's unpack the mechanism of how that happens.
The lecture posits that in certain eras of the Jewish tradition, the emphasis on God's transcendence, his absolute otherness, became so extreme that the very name of God, Yahweh, became utterly unutterable.
You could not speak it.
Right. God became so abstracted, so completely removed from the physical, tangible plane of human existence, that he was effectively detached from daily life.
But why is that a trap? I mean, doesn't that just show immense respect for the infinite?
It does, but there is a psychological mechanism at play. When you push the concept of the divine entirely out of the tangible world, you create a vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
And so does human society. The speaker argues that when God is too abstract to interact with, human beings inadvertently step up to fill that void.
Oh, wow.
They begin to establish their own absolute laws, their own untethered authority. By making God completely unreachable, humans effectively begin acting as their own gods because there is no tangible divine presence to check their ego.
It's like having a CEO who is so high up in the corporate cloud that they never interact with the floor. So middle management just starts running the company however they want.
That is a very apt, albeit secular, analogy. The oversight becomes purely theoretical rather than practical.
But then, according to the source, early Christianity reacted to this extreme abstraction by sprinting in the exact opposite direction. They looked at this distant, abstract God and said, we need to feel him.
Yes. The speaker argues that early Christianity, heavily driven by the theology of Paul of Tarsus, embraced extreme teshbih. To cure the problem of the unapproachable abstract God, they brought the divine entirely into human form.
They made God bleed, eat, and die.
Right. They introduced the concept of Jesus as the literal biological Son of God.
And from the strict Islamic perspective presented in the lecture, why does that break the system?
Because taking a limited, finite, biological human form and elevating it to the status of the absolute infinite creator erases the line between creation and the creator.
It muddies the waters completely.
From this perspective, it is a direct path to idolatry or shirk. You are no longer worshiping the infinite. You are worshiping a localized physical manifestation. You've shrunk the cosmos down to fit inside a human body.
So extreme abstraction, Tedzi, makes God irrelevant and creates the secular vacuum. Extreme anthropomorphism, teshbih, turns God into an idol. Seems like an impossible problem. What is the solution proposed by the lecture?
The solution is the Quranic balance, which maintains a dynamic, almost paradoxical tension. It is summarized by the verse, "Nothing is like him, period."
Nothing is like him.
God encompasses the human mind, but the limited human mind cannot possibly encompass the unlimited God.
Which means you can't picture God.
Exactly. The moment you form an image of God in your mind, you are no longer thinking about God. You are thinking about your own imagination.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, while God has no physical form, he is intensely, intimately involved in your physical reality. He is closer to you than your jugular vein, but he is not you.
So what does this actually mean for us practically? Because the host of this lecture points out a modern philosophical trend that takes this idea of God as completely unlike us to a really dangerous extreme.
Yes, the simulation hypothesis.
Yes. Or, in classical Islamic philosophy, what was called wadat al-wujud, taken to a toxic relativistic extreme.
Right.
The idea is this. If the ultimate reality, God, is completely untethered from our physical reality, then this physical world, our bodies, our lives, it must all just be an illusion.
It's a dream.
It's the Matrix. Isn't it incredibly tempting to just look at all the suffering in the world and say, you know what, none of this is real anyway?
It is deeply tempting. It acts as a psychological anesthetic against the pain of the world. And it is an incredibly popular notion right now, not just in esoteric spiritual circles, but in like Silicon Valley tech circles. The idea that we are just living in a sophisticated simulation.
But the speaker in this lecture fiercely, passionately rejects this illusion theory.
He practically yells about it. He uses this visceral example. He says if someone sits there and tells you reality isn't real, you should reach out and slap them across the face.
I love that visual.
And when they get angry and complain, you tell them, why are you mad? You aren't real, your cheek isn't real, and the slap wasn't real.
It is a humorous point, but it belies a deeply serious, devastating critique of this philosophy. The speaker explains the specific mechanism of why this illusion theory is so destructive.
Walk me through his reasoning on that.
Well, if you successfully convince yourself that physical reality is a simulation, a dream, or a hologram, it leads straight into moral nihilism and pure hedonism.
Because the consequences aren't real.
Right. If nothing is real, then actions have no moral weight. It completely erases the foundational lines between good and evil, between justice and injustice.
Yeah, that makes a terrifying kind of sense.
If the world is a simulation, then dropping a bomb on a crowded city is morally equivalent to turning off a video game console. The suffering of a starving child is just code.
Wow.
Oppression isn't evil, it's just a narrative arc in a virtual reality. It strips all moral consequence from human action. If it's a dream, you can do whatever you want.
It's the ultimate abdication of responsibility. And the source roots the rejection of this idea in historical and theological logic. The speaker asks a very grounding question. Think about the prophets.
Okay, let's think about them.
Think about Abraham in the fire, Moses facing Pharaoh, Jesus enduring persecution, Muhammad bleeding in battle. Did these men endure exile, agonizing physical pain, the loss of their children, and systemic persecution for a virtual reality?
Did they bleed for a hologram?
Exactly. No, they fought because the stakes were absolute.
The stakes were real.
The physical world, human suffering, the clash between justice and oppression, our daily moral choices, these are fiercely, undeniably, tangibly real. God's transcendence does not negate the reality of the physical world. In fact, it is the exact opposite.
Because God created it.
Because this physical world was created by the absolute reality, the physical world is endowed with ultimate consequence.
Okay, so we've established a few absolute pillars here. One, God is entirely beyond human comprehension, completely transcendent.
Right.
Two, the physical world, our bodies, and our moral choices are deeply, undeniably real. But if you look at those two pillars, they don't touch. We are left with a massive gap. Since God isn't a physical thing we can touch, but we are stuck in a physical world, what is the exact mechanism of contact?
How do we cross over?
How does a finite human being bridge the gap to an infinite creator?
This brings us to the final, and in many ways, the most beautiful concept in the lecture. The concept of vessel. The word translates to the means, the medium, or the bridge.
And the speaker starts this section by violently tearing down a very popular, but according to him, deeply flawed idea of what that bridge looks like.
He does not hold back here.
Not at all. He sharply mocks the idea of human intercessors. He tells this culturally specific anecdote about his so-called sheikh or spiritual guru. This guru claims that on the day of judgment, he's going to gather all of his loyal followers, hide them safely inside his spiritual cloak, and just smuggle them across the bridge into heaven.
Bypassing any personal accountability. The lecture is entirely uncompromising here. The Quran explicitly and repeatedly rejects this kind of spiritual nepotism. No one can carry another person's burden.
You can't outsource your salvation.
You cannot outsource your spiritual heavy lifting to a guru, a priest, a sheikh, or a saint. To prove how absolute this rule is, the speaker brings up a powerful historical example involving the prophet Muhammad himself speaking to his own beloved daughter, Fatima.
Yeah, that story actually gave me chills. The prophet looks at his own daughter, the person he arguably loves most in the world, and tells her, "Do not rely on the fact that your father is a prophet. By God, I cannot save you tomorrow. You must purchase your own soul from God."
It is a devastatingly clear standard. If the prophet himself, the ultimate human example in this tradition, cannot act as a magical intercessor or a get-out-of-jail-free card for his own biological child, then no modern spiritual leader, no matter how charismatic, can do it for you.
You are individually responsible for bridging the gap.
So if a human being cannot be the vessel, what is the true bridge?
The source explains that the true vessel is a two-way street. Coming down from the infinite creator to the finite human world are the Esma, the divine names. Going up from the finite human being toward the infinite creator are Saleh, which translates to righteous deeds.
So God reaches down into our reality with language, with names, and we reach back up toward his reality with physical, tangible action.
Exactly. But we have to understand how those names actually function as a downward bridge.
To explain this, the speaker references the great classical Islamic philosopher al-Ghazali, specifically his masterwork al-Maqsadul Esna. Ghazali introduces this brilliant paradoxical concept. The divine names are a veil.
Okay, let's build this out, because when we hear the word veil, our instinct is to think of something that hides the truth.
Like a curtain.
Right. Something that blocks our vision or keeps us in the dark. But I want to try an analogy here and tell me if this tracks with Ghazali's intent. Think of a movie theater.
Okay, let's play this out.
If you walk into a theater and you turn around and stare directly into the projector bulb, what happens?
You go blind.
You go blind. It's just sheer, overwhelming, infinite light.
Yeah.
You can't see the movie, you can't see characters, you just see glaring intensity.
Right. You are overwhelmed by the source.
Exactly. So you need a veil. You need the movie screen. The screen is a literal physical barrier. It intercepts the light. It stands between you and the pure light of the projector.
I see where you're going.
But, and this is the key, without that screen blocking the light, you wouldn't be able to see the movie at all. The screen doesn't just hide the light, it captures it and reveals the image in a way your eyes can actually process.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it perfectly encapsulates Ghazali's philosophical point. The veil doesn't obstruct reality, it translates it.
It translates the infinite.
And this aligns perfectly with the source's explanation of the story of Moses and the burning bush.
Yes, let's talk about that.
The speaker references the Quranic accounts in Surah Qasas and Surah Nur. Moses is in the desert, and he hears the voice of God, but the voice is emanating from a burning tree. Now, the fundamental theology insists that the tree is not God. God is not a plant. Furthermore, the Quran states that God does not speak directly, unfiltered, to human biology.
Because if he did, we'd shatter, right? The speaker says if God spoke directly to our raw biology, our finite cells cannot hold infinite energy.
Precisely. The tree was the medium, it was the veil, it was your projector screen. It was a localized focal point that allowed Moses to interact with the divine presence without his biology being instantly disintegrated.
That makes perfect sense.
And the source argues that the Esmaul Husna, the beautiful names, act in the exact same mechanical way for us today. The names are our personal burning bush.
That perfectly explains the linguistic rule he points out about how Muslims are taught to initiate actions. He notes that the phrase is Bismillah, which means in the name of God. It is emphatically not Billah, which would mean with God himself.
Right, because the human mind needs the intermediary. It needs the screen. You cannot mentally grasp the absolute raw essence of the infinite creator. It will fry your cognitive circuits.
But you can grasp the concept of the most merciful.
Exactly. You can conceptualize the provider, the just, the all-knowing. The names are the interface between the finite and the infinite.
So when a person grasps onto these names with their mind, when they understand the Esma, and then they pair that understanding with righteous actions, Salih Amel, with their body, they are quite literally climbing the ladder to the divine.
They are participating in the bridge.
It is an incredibly cohesive, beautifully structured framework for existence. It completely redefines how we should view our daily interactions.
It really is. We started this deep dive wondering why on earth a scholar would spend 4 solid months just talking about the idea of names without actually defining them.
And now we see the architecture of it all. We've journeyed from seeing how the capacity for symbolic vocabulary elevated Adam over the angels. We've explored how the physical universe is engaged in a cosmic chorus, tasbih, and how our own internal biology responds to the gravity of the words we choose.
It's all connected.
We've seen how the agonizing trials of life are actually kilam, a visceral vocabulary actively carving character into the permanent substance of our souls. And finally, we've seen how the divine names serve as the crucial revealing veil, the projector screen, that allows our limited, finite minds to touch infinite reality without shattering.
It challenges you to fundamentally stop seeing language as cheap, disposable noise, and to start seeing it as the very fabric of your connection to both the tangible world and the infinite.
Which brings me right back to where we started. I asked you to think about how a single sentence, a handful of words, could entirely change the trajectory of your life. We've learned today that words are not just passive descriptors. They aren't just labels.
No, they're active builders.
They are active physical builders of reality. And the divine names are the ultimate veil through which we are allowed to perceive the infinite. But if words are veils that both hide and reveal, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over today.
Yeah, think about your daily life.
Think about the internal monologue running through your head. What kind of reality are you actively weaving with the words you choose to use about yourself and about others every single day? When you speak out into the world, when you engage in your own personal kavol or kilam, are your words building a bridge or are they building a wall? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to grapple with these massive concepts. Remember, the pursuit of understanding is a never-ending journey. Keep diving.
Today's material is a theological and linguistic exploration of the beautiful names of Allah, focusing on how divine names and human language bridge the gap between the infinite creator and the finite human mind. So, a key theme running through this material seems to be the sheer power of words, right? From humans taming elephants with language, to the angels bowing to Adam because of his knowledge of names.
Yeah, that's definitely the core thread holding it all together.
But jumping straight into the structure, I have to ask, does the sequencing of these philosophical concepts actually maximize their impact? Because right now, it feels like it's creating a massive roadblock.
The conceptual progression from the basic linguistic definition of words to the ultimate theological purpose of divine names requires a more deliberate structural bridge. Right now, that bridge is entirely missing. And honestly, the author is giving us structural whiplash.
Structural whiplash is a great way to put it. I mean, let me break down how it currently reads. The text starts by arguing that words are what fundamentally make us human.
Right, which is a really strong opening.
It is. It paints this incredibly vivid picture of humanity using language to tame massive beasts, build civilizations, conquer mountains. But before we even have time to process that earthly reality, we are thrust into the metaphysical.
Yeah, it suddenly pivots to the linguistic anagrams of the Arabic word sabaha.
Exactly. Exploring how reversing its letters creates words for imprisoning or releasing. And from there, it just abruptly drops us into the deeply emotional, historical anecdote of Fatima.
The jump between those ideas is staggering, frankly. The weakness here is that the material brilliantly introduces the premise that words elevate us above mere biology, but then it chaotically bounces between earthly observations, abstract linguistic trivia, and profound metaphysical concepts.
It feels like there's no connective tissue.
None at all. We have human language as a societal tool on one hand, and divine names as a theological ladder to the divine on the other. Because these are presented in this rapid, non-sequential succession, the reader is left scrambling. I mean, they're trying to figure out how taming an elephant relates to an Arabic anagram.
Yeah, it basically feels like the author is handing the reader a pile of lumber and expecting them to just, see a fully built staircase.
That's exactly it. So my suggestion to resolve this is to completely reorder these narrative blocks to establish a clear ascending hierarchy.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Well, the text needs to start with the practical necessity of language on Earth, then elevate into the metaphysical power of words, and finally peak with the ultimate discussion of the divine names as the highest form of language.
So move the segment about how humans use words to tame beasts to the very beginning?
Yes. Put that before diving into the deep theological narrative of Adam and the angels.
I want to challenge that sequence for a moment, though. I love the vivid, descriptive language used in the Fatima story, and it creates this really touching moment of suspense regarding her physical struggles. Is there a risk that focusing solely on this rigid hierarchy in this case, putting the philosophical weight of the Adam narrative first, might overlook the emotional weight of those historical anecdotes if they're presented out of sequence?
It's a fair question, but putting it at the end doesn't bury it. It actually turns it into the ultimate payoff. Furthermore, use the Fatima anecdote, specifically the 33 repetitions of Subhanallah, to heal her physical exhaustion as the concluding emotional anchor for this entire section.
Oh, I see. Because if you start with the Fatima story, it reads as just a nice standalone emotional anecdote.
But if you sequence this correctly, you ground the reader first in how words tame the physical world.
the elephants, the mountains. Then you elevate to the Adam narrative, where angels bow to humanity because of our capacity to grasp divine names.
And then if you place the Fatima story after that, wow, it suddenly becomes the practical, devastatingly beautiful application of that cosmic philosophy.
You've got it. It will show, rather than just tell, how divine words provide strength where physical endurance fails. It proves that the ladder of language given to Adam isn't just some ancient abstract myth.
Right, it becomes a tangible tool for survival in the grueling daily reality of human life. So the progression goes from words taming physical beasts, to words defining cosmic reality, to words taming human physical exhaustion and despair.
That is the exact ascending hierarchy. You show the reader how divine words operate at the absolute highest level of human experience.
I love that. Let's carry that idea of words having a tangible impact into the next major section. Let's look closely at the section discussing the epistemology of the water analogy.
Ah, yes, the Masaru Emoto experiment.
Yeah, the material transitions into discussing how words physically alter reality. And it brings in that well-known Japanese experiment where water molecules supposedly change into beautiful geometric shapes when exposed to good words and turn into chaotic blobs when exposed to bad ones.
The incorporation of the water molecule experiment introduces a fragile empirical claim that dilutes the profound metaphysical arguments being made.
I can see the temptation to use it, though. The author points out that the human body is roughly 3/4 water. The implied argument is visually striking.
Oh, the visual is stunning, certainly.
Right? Like, if words can physically reorganize water in a laboratory, they must literally reorganize the cellular structure of our bodies when we speak divine names. It grounds a very high-level spiritual concept into a reality that a modern reader can instantly visualize.
It does, but the weakness is that the text relies heavily on a popular, yet scientifically contested experiment to quote-unquote prove the physical power of words.
You mean because the science doesn't really hold up?
Exactly. Because the author is aiming for a highly robust, deeply logical theological discourse. Relying on this experiment introduces an unnecessary vulnerability. They shift the foundation of the argument from unshakable philosophical deduction to a highly debatable pseudoscientific claim.
It reminds me of a defense attorney who builds this flawless, logically airtight case for their client, but right before the closing arguments, they submit a piece of evidence that everyone in the courtroom knows is forged.
That analogy captures the risk perfectly. Even if the client is entirely innocent, that one weak piece of evidence discredits the entire masterful argument that preceded it.
And it gives a skeptical reader an incredibly easy target, right? They can just dismiss the wider, valid theological points.
Completely. They no longer have to engage with the complex theology of the divine names. They can simply point to the debunked water experiment, roll their eyes, and check out.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this. That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like, what if the author intentionally wants to bridge modern science and ancient theology to reach a specific demographic?
I understand that urge. We live in an empirical age, and a lot of modern readers will check out of a purely metaphysical argument unless you give them data.
Right. So isn't the experiment serving a purpose for those readers?
Well, even if that is the goal, choosing a universally accepted scientific metaphor would serve that purpose much better. If you're trying to reach an empirically minded demographic, using contested science will backfire spectacularly.
Because they're the ones most likely to fact-check it.
Exactly. When they find out the water experiment doesn't hold up to peer review, they will assume that theology doesn't hold up to scrutiny either. You cannot bridge theology and modern science using bad science.
So do we just cut the entire section? The transition from chaos to cosmos through the use of words is such a beautiful motif in the text. Losing it feels like a total disservice to the writing.
No, we don't have to throw the water imagery away. My suggestion is to pivot the focus from the literal physical transformation of external elements to the internal spiritual transformation of the believer.
So keep the water but change how it's framed?
Yes, retain the water concept but utilize it strictly as a poetic metaphor rather than as empirical scientific proof.
Okay, that fundamentally changes how the sentence needs to be written.
Give me a concrete example of how the author translates that from empirical claim to poetic metaphor on the page.
Sure. Instead of claiming the experiment is definitive proof of words altering atoms, rephrase the section to reflect a spiritual truth. For instance, the author could write something like, just as some artists and thinkers have imagined that beautiful words could harmonize water, we know definitively that engaging with the divine names harmonizes the chaotic waters of the human soul.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that totally removes the burden of scientific defense.
It elevates the text back to the realm of the spiritual and the philosophical, which is where the true strength of this material actually lies. You retain the beautiful imagery of 3/4 of the human body is water, but you detach it from needing scientific validation.
And you keep that transition from chaos to cosmos. I like that a lot. You know, this desire to physically prove a spiritual concept doesn't just create vulnerabilities in the science section. It actually bleeds directly into how the author handles opposing viewpoints later in the text.
Ah, the tone shifts.
Yeah, exactly. The material makes a strong case for balancing complex theology by highlighting the delicate tension between anthropomorphism, which is referred to as teshbih, and absolute transcendence, or tenzi.
The author walks an incredibly difficult tightrope in that section. It requires immense academic rigor to explore that balance.
They really do. The text meticulously explains how leaning too far into transcendence creates a distant, unknowable God, while leaning too far into anthropomorphism reduces the divine to flawed human limitations. But then, right in the middle of this elevated discussion, the text pivots.
The sudden tonal shifts into aggressive polemics disrupt the elevated and contemplative atmosphere meticulously established earlier in the discourse.
It's jarring. When criticizing relativists, people who believe objective reality is an illusion, the author suddenly writes about wanting to bring a relativist over to, quote, slap him, just to see if he still thinks the pain of the slap is an illusion.
The weakness here is that this whiplash alienates readers who are highly engaged with the primary theological thesis. The text builds a transcendent, deeply respectful tone when discussing the latter of the divine names.
Right, you're floating in this transcendent space, and out of nowhere, you're reading a colloquial joke about physical violence.
Exactly. It jarringly shifts into a highly conversational, slightly mocking tone when criticizing opposing views. And it diminishes the author's authoritative voice.
There's an even more extreme instance of this a few pages later. The author is discussing the concept of false intercession, specifically critiquing followers of certain sheikhs who believe they will be hidden in a cloak to cross into heaven.
Right, the cloak intercessors.
Yeah, and the text actually mocks this belief by using cartoonish sound effects, describing the followers dropping out of the cloak going, putty, putty, putty.
It makes the argument feel remarkably small. You're writing a piece that aims to explore the highest linguistic and theological concepts known to humanity, and then you resort to slapstick imagery.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. The passion in these sections is palpable. The author clearly feels a visceral frustration with concepts they view as spiritually damaging.
Oh, absolutely, the passion is there.
Right, so building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of high-stakes warnings? Could the author use these moments of contrast not as polemics, but as solemn warnings, keeping the emotional intensity high without losing the academic rigor?
Maintaining emotional intensity doesn't require slapstick comedy or threats of slapping, though. My suggestion is to harmonize the tone by framing these theological disagreements as abstract philosophical pitfalls rather than personal attacks or localized mocking caricatures.
So how do they keep the passion but lose the pettiness?
The author must maintain the dignified, objective voice established in the linguistic sections throughout the entire piece. You can write a devastating critique of an opposing view without losing your dignity.
Okay, give me an example. How do they execute that on the page for the relativism argument? If they remove the joke about slapping the relativist, what replaces it?
Instead of using the colloquial "bring him here so I can slap him" to disprove relativism, the author can use the classic, dignified theological argument regarding the reality of pain and moral consequence to prove objective existence.
Ah, So you explore how the physical sensation of suffering intrinsically disproves nihilism.
Precisely. The biological and spiritual response to pain demands the existence of an objective reality. It makes the exact same point about pain proving reality, but it respects the reader's intellect.
And what about the section on the cloak intercessors? How do you critique a concept that the author clearly finds inherently absurd without resorting to making potty potty potty sound effects?
When discussing the cloak intercessors, elevate the critique by omitting the mocking sound effects entirely. Instead, cleanly contrast the concept of false intercession with the rigorous Quranic idea of individual responsibility.
Right. The text briefly mentions saleh hamel, righteous deeds, as the true means of approach, or viseli.
Exactly. The author should expand on that. Frame the critique as a profound tragedy rather than a comedy. You explore the tragedy of a human being abandoning the beautiful ladder of the divine names for an empty illusion.
That's a massive shift in perspective, but it's so much more powerful. Shining the uncompromising light of rigorous, dignified logic upon the flawed idea is always going to hit harder than a joke.
It really is. It keeps the philosophical gravity intact from start to finish.
Well, we've covered some crucial ground today regarding how to bridge the gap between human language and these massive theological concepts. To quickly recap our main takeaways. First, the author needs to create a deliberate hierarchy when discussing the evolution of language.
Right, moving sequentially from the earthly necessity of language up to the metaphysical and peaking with the Fatima narrative.
Exactly. Second, utilize the water molecule concept strictly as a spiritual metaphor rather than empirical proof to maintain the robustness of the argument. And finally, harmonize the tone by replacing aggressive polemics with dignified philosophical contrasts.
These are highly actionable steps. If the author implements these structural and tonal shifts, the profound theology at the heart of this text will resonate with the clarity and power it deserves.
Absolutely. The underlying exploration of how human language interacts with the divine is absolutely captivating, and we warmly invite the listener to revise their work based on this critique and submit it back for further review. Because ultimately, constructing a theological argument is very much like building a ladder. Every single rung needs to be solid. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Welcome to the debate. If you stood right next to a star, its light wouldn't warm you. It would vaporize you instantly.
Right. Instantly.
But because we have millions of light years of empty space between us and that star, the radiation is diluted. That unimaginable distance acts as a filter, allowing that exact same starlight to safely reach our eyes so we can look up at the night sky and witness something spectacular, rather than being, incinerated by it.
And yet, because we can see that light, we feel an authentic connection to the cosmos. I mean, the vastness protects us, sure, but the light itself is what bridges the gap.
That tension, right there, between a light that directly connects you to reality and a distance that safely protects you from it. That is the exact foundation of what we are exploring today. We are looking at a profound theological framework from our source material regarding the Esmaul Husna, the beautiful names of Allah. And the central question we have to answer is this. Do these divine names serve primarily as a direct bridge that empowers human beings, connecting our minds straight to the divine reality? Or are they fundamentally a necessary veil, like a proxy that protects human consciousness by keeping the ultimate, incomprehensible divine essence at a safe, survivable distance?
I mean, it's a massive question. It completely redefines how we understand human language and, well, our place in the universe.
It is. And just to be clear on where we both stand today, I represent the position that the divine names are an active, empowering bridge that physically and spiritually elevates humanity above all creation.
Right, and I represent the position that the divine names act primarily as a structural boundary and veil. They serve as a protective proxy, basically, because direct comprehension of the ultimate reality is fundamentally impossible for the human mind.
Okay, so let's start by looking at why the text so strongly supports the idea of the names as an elevating bridge. The source material makes this foundational claim about human supremacy in the cosmos, and it roots that supremacy entirely in language.
Sure. It points back to the concept of the exact moment humanity was created and taught the names. what the text refers to as Talamul Esma.
Right, the teaching of the names to Adam. Exactly. Now, according to the text, this wasn't just some ancient vocabulary lesson where Adam was taught to point at a tree and say, tree.
Right.
This event was the exact reason the angels were commanded to bow to humanity. The capacity to grasp these divine concepts, the Esma, is what made the human beings superior to celestial, perfectly obedient entities. I mean, the text is incredibly explicit here. Words are what make us human.
Meaning, if we were stripped of our vocabulary, we wouldn't just be quiet humans. We'd be a different species entirely.
We would regress to a purely biological animalistic state. The source describes the names as a ladder dropped from heaven to earth. Think about the words you use every day. When you adopt these divine names, you aren't just categorizing your reality. You are actively altering it. You are joining a cosmic chorus.
Okay, but
The text argues that when a human says something like Subhanallah, declaring the perfection of the divine, they are consciously, voluntarily aligning their human will with the very mechanism that keeps the universe in motion. That is not a veil. That is an act of ultimate, direct empowerment.
Okay, look, I hear the empowerment aspect, but I look at the exact same source material and I see a profound warning about human limitations. The absolute impossibility of the human intellect grasping the divine essence, what theology calls the Zat. That is the beating heart of this text.
Well, I wouldn't call it the beating heart.
It is, though. The source invokes the great 11th century thinker Al-Ghazali, who explicitly described the names as a veil, a perde. Now, why do we need a veil? The text brings in a famous quote from the 19th century Ottoman poet Ziya Pasha, who said that human capacity is a set of scales that simply cannot hold such immense weight.
Meaning our mental hardware literally cannot run the software of infinite reality.
Precisely. The infinite cannot be contained by the finite. If you try to put the ocean into a teacup, the teacup shatters. Therefore, a proxy is required. Think of the burning bush analogy the text draws from the story of Moses. The voice Moses hears declares itself as the Lord of the worlds, but the sound is emanating from a tree. The tree is not the divine essence, it is the medium. And that medium is absolutely necessary. The names function in exactly the same way. They reflect the divine, yes, but fundamentally, they are a boundary. They ensure that our deeply limited human minds are not shattered by an unlimited absolute reality.
Okay, but let's look closer at how that limited mind actually operates in the physical world. Because I think you are really underplaying the sheer, practical power the text assigns to language.
I don't think I am.
You are. Words are not mere sounds. They aren't passive reflections or safe little teacups. They are tools of active mastery.
Mastery over the physical environment? Sure, I'll give you that.
Exactly. But the text ties physical mastery directly to spiritual vocabulary. It uses a very vivid analogy to explain this. The elephant. Imagine a human being standing next to a 10,000-pound elephant.
Without words, the human is nothing. The elephant would crush us 50 times over. We don't conquer the elephant through physical strength.
Right. We conquer it through communication.
Yes.
I mean, it is through words, through the conceptualization, the shared reality, the planning. The technology that language allows us to build, that is how the frail human being is able to ride the elephant, move mountains, and build civilizations. The text argues that possessing the divine names gives humanity that exact same active, participatory power over the cosmos itself.
Okay, but
Let me just finish this thought. It's not just about naming things from a distance. It's about claiming agency. When you know the names, you aren't just observing the universe safely behind a glass wall. You are stepping into the arena. You are taking the raw material of existence and interacting with it.
see, I come at it from a different way. You are equating the practical utility of human language, how we tame beasts and build bridges, with the ontological reality of the divine names, and the text specifically warns against blurring that exact line.
How does it warn against it?
Yes, words give us mastery over elephants, but ultimate reality isn't an elephant to be tamed. Come on.
But the text uses that analogy to show that language grants us access to higher orders of reality.
Access, yes, but not the reality itself. The text makes a crucial, like a deeply crucial distinction between the word and the ultimate action it points toward. Let's look at the ultimate act of human submission discussed in the material. The physical prostration in prayer, the secte.
Which is a deeply physical and linguistic act.
It is, but look closely at the linguistics of that act as highlighted in the source. The Quranic command explicitly says to glorify the name of your Lord. It specifically commands the use of the word, name.
Right.
Yet when the prophet actually taught the practical, physical application of this, what human beings actually say when their forehead hits the ground, the word name is dropped. We say Subhan Rabbi al-Azim, which means glory to my Lord the Great. We don't say Subhana Ismi Rabbi al-Azim. We don't say glory to the name of my Lord. We drop the word for name entirely.
That is a very specific linguistic shift, sure. Why do you think the text emphasizes that?
Because the text argues this proves the name is just a temporary vehicle. The name gets you to the door, but when true connection with the essence occurs through righteous physical action, what the text calls saleh amel, the word must disappear. In the moment of absolute submission, with your face on the earth, you are no longer dealing with the proxy. The name vanishes because the action itself becomes the connection. Think about it. If the name was the ultimate bridge, we would cling to it at the very climax of our prayer, but we don't. We let it go.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what happens when the name is actually invoked in the physical world. Because the source material completely rejects the idea that the names are just abstract, temporary vehicles that we discard when we reach the finish line.
It really doesn't, though.
It does. In fact, it pushes the narrative violently from abstract theology into physical, observable reality. It brings up the Japanese water molecule experiment.
Ah, right. The experiments about phonetic vibrations freezing into crystals.
Right. But the text uses it as far more than just a study on phonetic vibrations. It explicitly uses it to make a massive theological point. The premise is this. Human beings are roughly 2/3 water. The source argues that reciting the name Allah literally harmonizes the chaotic internal molecules of the human body, turning chaos into a geometric cosmos. It creates an internal cosmic orchestra.
Okay, but how does that prove it's not a veil?
Because of why the text brings it up. It introduces this physical phenomenon specifically to reject nihilism. Nihilism claims that the universe is random, that everything is relative, that life is just a meaningless hologram. But if a specific word physically orders matter into perfect symmetry, it proves that meaning is baked into the very physics of the universe.
Well, sure, but
The reality of things is fixed. If reciting a divine name physically restructures the cellular foundation of your body, you cannot dismiss that name as just a temporary protective veil or a proxy. It is an instrument of profound physical and metaphysical intervention. It brings the divine directly into the cellular structure of human existence. It is the bridge.
But don't you see that this profound physical reaction is exactly why the names must operate as a veil?
How so?
If merely a phonetic representation, like an acoustic shadow of the divine, is powerful enough to radically restructure the molecular foundation of water, imagine what direct exposure to the essence would do to us. It would be cataclysmic. The fact that our molecules react so violently to the name proves that the name is mediating an otherwise unendurable power. Think about a transformer on a power line outside your house.
Right, stepping down the voltage from the grid.
Exactly. There are millions of volts running through those primary lines. If you plugged your living room lamp directly into the main grid, it wouldn't just blow the bulb, it would burn your house to the ground.
Okay.
The transformer takes that immense, raw, destructive power and steps it down, filtering it into a manageable 120 volts that safely illuminates your room. The names are transformers, and the text backs this up brilliantly through its analysis of Arabic linguistic architecture.
Oh, you're talking about the anagrammatic nature of the language?
Yes, this is one of the most stunning points in the material. The text points out how words in Arabic mirror each other to create boundaries. Take the Arabic word for glorifying the divine or setting things in perpetual motion. Sadbaha.
Okay, sabaha. That is a beautiful linguistic puzzle, but how does it actually prove the names are a veil?
Because it shows that the linguistic architecture itself is a cage. It is a code deliberately designed to safely contain meaning. Language fundamentally traps infinite concepts into finite, manageable phonetic cages. Habese. It contains them. The names are not the absolute reality. They are the filter, the habese, that allows us to interact with the sebaha, the infinite motion of the divine, without being consumed by it. They are boundaries, beautiful boundaries, but boundaries nonetheless.
If we're going to talk about boundaries, let's talk about the absolute historical danger of leaning too far into the idea of boundaries and walls. Because if we treat God primarily as a distant, walled-off entity, things go terribly wrong for humanity.
How so?
This is where I think the source material makes its absolute strongest argument for the names acting as a direct bridge. The text explores the tragedy of historical religious extremes, specifically contrasting the concepts of tenzi and teshbih.
Right. For the listener, let's define those quickly. Tenzi is absolute transcendence, the idea that God is so utterly removed from creation that nothing can be compared to him.
Right. And the source associates this extreme tanzih with early interpretations of Yahweh in the ancient tradition. God was made so incredibly distant, so completely veiled by his own majesty, that his name couldn't even be spoken aloud. And what was the historical result of that absolute veil? Well, the text argues that when God is pushed that far out of human reach, humans step into the void and play God themselves. Without a direct bridge, the moral anchor completely vanishes.
I mean, it's a profound historical critique. I won't deny that.
But then, the text notes, humanity saw the exact opposite extreme as a reaction. Absolute comparison, or tishbih. This is anthropomorphism. The source associates this with the Pauline shift in early Christianity, where the divine was reduced entirely to a human form to make him accessible. The logic was, well, if God is too far away for understand, we must make him a man walking on earth.
Pulling the infinite all the way down into the finite.
Exactly. Both extremes failed. Absolute distance led to arrogance, and absolute comparison led to reducing the divine to flesh and bone. And here is the genius of the text. It presents the Esmaul Husna, the beautiful names, as the perfect, active middle ground.
Okay.
The names allow God to intervene directly in human life. We can speak to him, he shapes our reality, he orders our molecules, without us ever reducing him to a human shape. The names are the very mechanism that allows deep intimacy without anthropomorphism. If you relegate them to being primarily a veil, a cage, or a boundary, you risk sliding right back into that dangerous, unapproachable tanzi, where God is so distant that we lose our connection to him entirely.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the text itself insists the names must lean heavily toward necessary transcendence to protect us from ourselves?
Protect us?
Yes. The ultimate rule established in the Quran, which the source quotes directly, is Laysa kamislihi shay, meaning nothing is like him, period. It doesn't matter what beautiful concept you imagine in your mind, it is not God. Therefore, the names are essentially what the text calls a tanazul.
A condescension, a stepping down.
A conscious lowering by the divine to meet human limitation. They are a pedagogical tool for a species that requires metaphors to understand reality. We need maps to navigate. The text repeatedly calls the names and our righteous deeds our vesselae, our means of approach, but it is a grave theological error to confuse the map for the actual territory.
But the map gets you to the destination.
Yes, but if you look at a map of a mountain and think you've actually climbed the mountain, you are living in an illusion. The danger of treating the names as the ultimate direct bridge is that human beings begin to worship the linguistic construct rather than the ultimate reality behind it. We idolize the map. We must not confuse the beautiful veil for the face it obscures.
But the source explicitly argues against the idea that the veil is just some lesser illusion we have to get past. When addressing those who claim that our lived reality is just a dream, a simulation, or mere sophistry, which you might call falling in love with the illusion, The speaker in the text gets intensely passionate.
Right, about morality.
He says that arguing the physical world and our interactions are not real destroys the difference between good and evil. If it's all just a veil, then my actions don't matter. It leads straight to hedonism.
Look, I agree completely with that reading of the text. Nihilism is the enemy here.
Then you must see that the names, which give order to this reality, cannot just be protective proxies. They're the foundational building blocks of a real, morally weighty existence. If the names were just a veil to shield us from the truth, then the words we use to navigate life wouldn't carry ultimate moral significance. But the text says something incredible.
Go on.
It states that the word of unity, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, is heavier than the entire material universe combined. That isn't the description of a temporary proxy or a disposable map. That is a description of the ultimate intervening reality manifesting itself directly into human consciousness.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that leap in logic. Let me tell you why. You are conflating the weight of the truth with our method of carrying it. Imagine a thick lead box carrying highly radioactive, unstable material.
Okay, a lead box.
The box is incredibly heavy, it is vital, and it is entirely real. But the box is not the radioactive material itself. The word of unity is heavier than the universe because of what it points to, what it safely contains for us. It's the lead box. And the text proves this when the speaker reminds us of the story of Abraham.
When Abraham was tested by God?
Yes, the text specifically says Abraham was tested by words. But then it clarifies that these weren't spoken words. They were massive, traumatic life events. The raging fire of Nimrod that Abraham was thrown into was a word. The command to sacrifice his son Ishmael was a word.
Meaning the events themselves left an indelible mark, like a permanent tattoo on the soul.
Exactly. The text analyzes the deep linguistic root of the Arabic term for word, which is kalam. It points out that kalam literally originates from the concept of a wound, a cut, or a profound physical mark. The raw, bleeding experiences of life are the real words of God.
Right, but
let me finish this. The verbal names we recite, the asma, are the structural framework that helps us endure and make sense of those wounds. They mediate the brutal, overwhelming reality of existence. They veil the pure, terrifying chaos of ultimate truth so we can navigate our lives ethically. The names don't replace the fire of Nimrod. They protect the believer who is forced to walk through it.
Wow. Well, it seems we are arriving at a fundamental philosophical crossroads here, which makes this a really good time to bring our threads together. As we look back at the source material's profound exploration of the Esmaul Husna, my stance remains that these beautiful names are primarily a dynamic, empowering bridge. They are the ultimate tools granted to humanity in that original moment of creation, the talimul esma, that elevate us above the angels and give us mastery over the elephant. They are the linguistic code that allows us to physically restructure reality, turning chaotic water molecules into cosmic order. Most importantly, they provide the crucial middle ground that allows human beings to intimately participate in the divine order without falling into the historical traps of making God a distant void or a human being. They are the active vocabulary of our cosmic elevation.
And my position remains that the text overwhelmingly points to the names as a beautiful, necessary veil. By recognizing that the human intellect is a fragile teacup, incapable of holding the infinite ocean, we must accept the names as a protective proxy. Just like the burning bush that safely reflected the divine to Moses, or the transformer that steps down the voltage so we aren't incinerated.
Right.
The names are a tinazzle, a conscious stepping down by the Creator. Like the anagram of Habasa, they act as a cage that safely contains infinite meaning. They mediate the incomprehensible reality of God to the incredibly finite capacity of the human mind, preventing us from being utterly destroyed by an unfiltered truth we are simply not equipped to handle.
Yet, despite this deep substantive disagreement on their primary mechanism, bridge versus veil, I think it's clear we both agree on one vital point raised by the source material. We both see that the divine names are the indispensable vessel, the necessary means for humanity to avoid the dark pits of nihilism.
Absolutely. I mean, whether you view them as a bridge you walk across to reach reality or a veil you look through to survive reality, the text is completely clear. Without them, humanity loses its moral compass and regresses to a mere biological existence.
This text holds incredible depth, peeling back layers of linguistics, history, physics, and theology to ask us how we truly interact with the divine. It forces us to examine the very words that leave a mark, a kalem, on our hearts. We'll leave you to ponder your own vocabulary today. When you look up at the vastness of the truth, do you view the words you use to describe it as the bridge that actively connects you to the light, or do you see them as the protective lens that simply allows you to survive the stare?